From breaking news in South Korea to stories from around the world, we're here to bring you the news that matters.
Truth, clarity, and impartiality. And that's what we uphold in a fast-changing world.
We go beyond the headlines, offering depth, context, and perspective.
This isn't just news, it's our commitment. News you trust. Arirang News.
Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump is addressing the public starting 9 p.m. Washington local time. And ahead of the primetime speech, he said Iran's new regime president had requested a ceasefire, without clarifying who he was referring to. But Iran denied the claim, calling it false and baseless. Starting today, the National Energy Crisis Alert has been raised to its second highest level. From next Wednesday, the government will tighten vehicle restrictions in the public sector, introducing a 2-day rotation system to help curb energy demand. Also addressing concerns from the Middle East war, President Lee Jae-myung will deliver a speech today for the passage of the government's supplementary budget. He's expected to ask for bipartisan support on the extra budget, worth around 26 trillion Korean won, or roughly $17 billion. We begin this morning with the latest on the conflict in the Middle East. With all eyes on what the U.S. President Donald Trump will say in his primetime address, sharply conflicting claims between Washington and Tehran are raising new questions about where the war is headed. Our Buniran starts us off.
Ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's primetime address on the conflict in the Middle East, a statement from Tehran has firmly denied Trump's claim that Iran is seeking a ceasefire. In a social media post on Wednesday, Trump said Iran's new regime president, whom he did not name, had requested a ceasefire, suggesting that any pause in fighting would depend on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for global energy supplies. He paired that claim with a warning of heavy strikes if conditions aren't met. But Tehran quickly pushed back. Its foreign ministry dismissed the statement as false and baseless, while the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps insisted the strategic waterway remains firmly under Iranian control and would not be reopened under pressure from Washington. That denial was followed by a direct appeal from Iran's president, who published a letter addressed to the American people just hours before Trump's scheduled address. In it, he questioned the justification for the war and argued that Iran poses no threat to warrant such military action against it. He emphasized that Tehran's actions are rooted in self-defense and suggested the United States is acting on behalf of Israel rather than its own national interest. The letter also underscored that Iran holds no hostility towards ordinary Americans, even as the conflict intensifies. At the same time, Trump appears to be signaling a possible off-ramp. According to Bloomberg, he has dispatched Vice President J.D. Vance to deliver an ultimatum to Iran: agree to a deal or face further strikes on key infrastructure. Trump is expected to outline that approach in his primetime address, highlighting U.S. military gains and reiterating a 2 to 3 week timeline to wrap up the operation. Ahead of the speech, he told Reuters the U.S. could wind down its involvement pretty quickly, while keeping the option of future spot hits. Trump on Wednesday also questioned why the U.S. should secure the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting countries like South Korea, Japan, China, and European nations, which rely heavily on the route, should take on that responsibility instead. 문혜련, Arirang News.
So U.S. President Donald Trump has publicly criticized South Korea for not being helpful as he continues to lash out at allies for their lack of support in the conflict with Iran. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron is set to visit South Korea today for the first time since taking office in 2017, making him the first French leader to visit South Korea in 11 years. For more on this, we're joined today by Professor Andrew Millard, head of the Department of International Relations at Taiwan National University. Professor Millard, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So Trump says Seoul hasn't been too helpful to Washington, even though American troops are stationed on the peninsula close to what he called a nuclear threat. How should South Korea and other allies respond to this claim?
So you're right. So Trump has been, in the past few days in particular, very vocal, very critical of all of his allies, really. And this really shows a lot of frustration that Donald Trump in particular is having because of this really prolonged war in Iran. So basically, Donald Trump has started this conflict, assuming that all of his allies would just unconditionally support this invasion, not really understanding that they recognize that this is not a legal invasion, so they're not supporting. Now, he's lashing out really at sort of the easier targets. So in Asia, this means lashing out at South Korea and also Japan, and in Europe, really focusing on the bigger powers like the United Kingdom and France. Now, for South Korea, if we focus on Korea, really, this could have very huge implications for security, especially in the wider Northeast Asian region. In the short term, we could see the reallocation of military assets, so troops and assets from Korea to the Middle East and elsewhere. But really, in the long term, this could threaten the US-South Korea Military Forces Treaty, which has been in place for 75 years. This has created the status quo in Northeast Asia, nice and stable. If the US start to withdraw troops and assets, this could really threaten Northeast Asian stability. And so really for South Korea, they need to try to convince the United States that they are a strong ally, that when they are really needed, they will be there. But they also need to maybe diversify and start strengthening security partnerships with other allies as well.
Right, like you just mentioned, it's not just South Korea that's being targeted. Trump has been hitting out at other European allies over the Iran war. And some analysts say growing resistance from NATO allies exposes, deepening divisions within this alliance. And given that NATO was already under, strain over issues like Ukraine and Greenland, what does this suggest about the future of NATO?
So again, Donald Trump has couple of days, he's been really threatening to withdraw from NATO. It'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say in his speech shortly about this issue. However, what has been a little bit more concerning, especially last night, was that Marco Rubio also came out and said, look, when this conflict with Iran finishes, the US, we really have to reevaluate our relationship with NATO. So this is looking not just like Donald Trump's personal rhetoric, this is really looking like the United States administration is really taking this very seriously. Now, in order to withdraw, they do technically need approval from the Senate. So that could be where the US pushes back a little bit. But in terms of the general divisions in NATO, apart from the US criticism, actually, if we look at Europe itself, we see a lot of unity. So with Ukraine, when Donald Trump threatened to withdraw support for Ukraine, we created the coalition of the willing. with Greenland. We saw a very quick reaction against the US in that one. And also with Iran, we're seeing the Europeans stick very closely together, following the principles, the values of NATO. So in the long term, we could definitely see a NATO without the US, potentially. If that happens, there will be one big winner, and that will be Russia. I'm sure right now in Moscow, in the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin is very happy to be hearing these sort of ideas.
Yeah, I see. President Lee Jae-myung today in South Korea will meet with French President Macron, and they're set to hold a summit tomorrow. How do you see them addressing the tensions in the Middle East?
So for both of these states, both countries, France and South Korea, they'll be looking for a very quick end to this conflict, as pretty much every country is, but they'll be looking for a diplomatic end to this solution, to this conflict, and sort of no escalation. We do see slightly different interests from the French and the South Koreans, though. For France, they're really looking to support their allies. Macron, he's been very clear that France is here purely in a defensive role. So they'll be supporting United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, their other allies in the region. They'll be wanting to support their own nationals in the region, and also other areas like Gaza, continuing humanitarian aid for Gaza, again, encouraging the two-state solution in Israel and so on. So that's really where the French focus will be, purely defensive in the region. For the South Koreans, the interests lie much more in sort of the oil, opening the Straits of Hormuz, because South Korea is more dependent on oil from the Middle East. Now, where the South Koreans can really commit to long-term participation is in, once the conflict finishes, a sort of a naval role, because as we know, South Korea, off the eastern coast of Africa, around Somalia, in the anti-piracy area, they have been involved in the EU Operation Atalanta, and they've been very committed to that and been very successful. So I'm sure President Lee will want to emphasize this, that they are committed to being in the region, to being part of some sort of coalition to maintain the open Straits of Hormuz.
Right, and Professor Miller, before I let you go, what might be some of the key bilateral issues they might likely focus on tomorrow?
So this is a very important one. So it's 140 years of French-South Korean relations. So this is quite a significant visit from Macron. They'll be talking obviously about security. I think that's going to be top of the agenda no matter what. But they'll also be doing cultural issues. So educational exchanges, people-to-people exchanges. There'll be discussions on trade and cooperation in AI, space and aviation, automobiles. Also in energy, so both are focused on decarbonization and also nuclear energy. Now, nuclear energy, actually, we've seen a little bit of competition between South Korea and France in that area. So maybe this is where we can actually see France maybe looking at South Korea more as a strategic partner coming up. So this is the first time that Macron is coming to South Korea. In almost 10 years he's been in office. So we have to look at this question, why now? Why after almost 10 years, just before he leaves office? So this sort of maybe signals that France now sees South Korea, similarly like to Japan, as much more of a strategic partner in Northeast Asia.
Right. We'll have to see how that meeting plays out tomorrow. All right, Professor Miller, thank you so much for taking the time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Starting next Wednesday, South Korea will tighten vehicle restrictions in the public sector, introducing a two-day rotation system to curb energy demand amid Middle East supply concerns. This comes as the National Energy Crisis Alert is raised to its second highest level, with broader measures under review. Our Lee Seung-jae explains more.
The government will introduce stricter vehicle controls in the public sector starting next week as it seeks to reduce energy consumption amid supply strain caused by escalating tensions in the Middle East. The Ministry of Climate, Energy and Environment said a mandatory 2-day vehicle rotation system will take effect next Wednesday, replacing the current 5-day system for public institutions. Under the new rules, vehicles will be restricted from operating every other business day based on the last digit of their license plates. Cars with odd-numbered plates will be allowed to operate on odd-numbered dates, while even-numbered plates will run on even-numbered dates. The private sector, however, will continue to follow the 5-day rotation system on a voluntary basis.
All government vehicles, not just commuter cars, will be subject to the measure. Previously exempt vehicles, including those for people with disabilities and electric vehicles, will remain exempt. Public institutions are asked to prepare thoroughly for implementation.
The measure comes as the government raises its resource security crisis alert to level 3 or orange, the second highest level in its 4-tier system. Several exemptions will apply. Electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles will be excluded, along with vehicles carrying people with disabilities or pregnant women. Also exempt are vehicles used by employees with limited access to public transportation, as well as those deemed essential by heads of public institutions. Meanwhile, public parking facilities operated by government agencies will continue to operate under a separate 5-day rotation system. The ministry added that expanding the mandatory system to the private sector remains under consideration and will be reviewed carefully based on energy supply conditions, public inconvenience, and potential economic impact. 이승재, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung will deliver a speech today for the passage of the government's supplementary budget drawn up in response to the Middle East war. He is expected to outline the uses of the extra budget of around 26 trillion Korean won, or some $17 billion, and ask for bipartisan support to ensure its swift approval. The budget includes funding to help alleviate high fuel costs, including cash assistance and support for the fuel price cap. On the diplomatic front, President Lee Jae-myung on Wednesday hosted his Indonesian counterpart, Prabowo Subianto, upgrading their bilateral partnership to a higher level. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jang-min reports.
The summit began with a grand welcome, a traditional honor guard for the state guests. President Lee Jae-myung hosted his Indonesian counterpart, Prabowo Subianto, on Wednesday at the Blue House, where they agreed to upgrade bilateral ties to a special comprehensive strategic partnership.
이번 대통령님의 국빈 방한을 계기로 양국 관계를 대한민국에서는 유일한 특별 포괄적 전략 동반자 관계로 격상하는 역사적인 결실을 맺게 되었습니다. 참으로
My state visit here comes at a situation where the world is full of uncertainty and danger. So this makes relationship between countries like Indonesia and Korea more important.
The talks yielded key deliverables as the importance of the bilateral cooperation was highlighted amid the global energy crunch due to the conflict in the Middle East.
우리는 인도네시아가 LNG와 석탄 등 주요 에너지원의 안정적 역할을 해주는 데 대해서 무척 든든하게 생각하고 있습니다. 이번 위기가 양국 경제와 국민의 삶에 미칠 영향이 최소화되도록 에너지의 안정적 공급 및 자원 안보 관련 양국 간의 협력을 확대해 나갈 필요성이 매우 큽니다.
You have achieved tremendous strides in your development. Your industry and your science and technology is very advanced. We have a lot of resources. We have a big market. We can complement each other.
A host of MOUs were exchanged, including cooperation on the economy, critical minerals, clean energy, and AI for health. South Korea and Indonesia also plan to bolster their defense industry cooperation based upon their joint development of the KF-21 fighter jet. The leaders also addressed their global contribution as middle powers. Later in the day, the Indonesian leader was hosted for a state lunch, along with key business leaders, building a personal bond and friendship. President Lee presented his Indonesian counterpart with the nation's highest order, the Grand Order of Mugunghwa. The top-level talks come amid what the president calls a complex poly-crisis on a global level. On Friday, President Lee will host his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, at the Blue House. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Consumer prices in South Korea rose to 2.2% in March, up for the first time since January, on the back of higher oil prices triggered by the Middle East conflict. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics this morning, the price of petroleum products surged by just under 10% compared to the year before, marking the fastest rise since October 2022 when the war in Ukraine began. Falling prices for agricultural goods helped ease overall inflation, with the index measuring prices for fresh food falling by more than 6%. Inflation in South Korea had held steady at 2% in both January and February. South Korean automakers Hyundai Motor and Kia posted record first-quarter results in the United States, despite a slight dip in March sales, driven by strong demand for eco-friendly vehicles and SUVs. Hyundai Motor America reported March sales of 84,087 units, down 3% from a year earlier, largely due to a high base effect from unusually strong pre-demand ahead of anticipated U.S. auto tariffs. However, strong momentum in January and February lifted Hyundai's first-quarter sales to 205,388 units, up 1% on year, marking its highest-ever first-quarter performance. Kia also achieved a record quarter, with sales rising 0.8% from the same period last year.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. President Donald Trump has warned that he may pull the United States out of NATO, blaming European allies for refusing to send warships to reopen the Strait of Hormuz amid the ongoing U.S. war with Iran. Speaking with Reuters on Wednesday, Trump said he would address the nation to express his disgust with NATO, confirming he was absolutely considering withdrawal. Hours earlier, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declined to reaffirm U.S. commitment to Article 5, the core guarantee that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. Other NATO members responded to the comments. Poland urged calm and said there is no NATO without the United States. Germany reaffirmed its commitment to the alliance, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said London would strengthen economic and defense ties with Europe regardless of Washington's next move. Security analysts warn that repeated U.S. threats against the alliance give Russia grounds to test whether collective defense commitments still hold. The United States on Wednesday lifted sanctions against Venezuelan interim president Delcy Rodriguez. This clears the way for her government to reclaim control of Venezuela's state-owned oil assets in the U.S., including refiner Citgo Petroleum. The Rodriguez government is reportedly already preparing to take over the boards of Venezuela's U.S.-based oil subsidiaries, assets that opposition-appointed supervisors have controlled since 2019. Rodriguez called the decision a step toward normalizing relations and urged Washington to lift all remaining sanctions on Venezuela. Since U.S. forces seized former President Nicolas Maduro in a raid at the start of the year, Washington has formally recognized Rodriguez as Venezuela's leader, sent cabinet officials to Caracas alongside potential investors, and reached an agreement with the U.S. to purchase Venezuelan oil. For the first time in U.S. history, a sitting president walked into the Supreme Court to watch his own policy go on trial. President Donald Trump sat in the courtroom on Wednesday as justices challenged the legal foundation of his executive order to restrict birthright citizenship. Chief Justice John Roberts called the administration's reading of the 14th Amendment, quote, quirky. Justice Neil Gorsuch, a Trump appointee, said the government's position was difficult to square with an 1898 Supreme Court precedent on birthright citizenship. The court is expected to rule on the case by end of June. NASA's Artemis II mission lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on Wednesday. The 10-day journey around the moon will send humans deeper into space than ever before. NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, lifted off just before sunset aboard the Space Launch System rocket. 3.5 hours into flight, the crew will take manual control of the Orion capsule to test its steering and maneuverability. That is the first of dozens of test objectives planned throughout the mission. Artemis II is a critical step toward NASA's first crewed lunar landing since 1972, which the agency targets for 2028.
With the recent stretch of warm weather, cherry blossoms in Seoul officially reached full bloom yesterday. In fact, one of the well-known spring festivals, the Yeouido Spring Flower Festival, will run for 5 days starting tomorrow, offering a great chance to enjoy the peak of the season. Meanwhile, temperatures continue to show a wide range between morning and afternoon, so make sure to dress in layers. However, air quality remains an issue, especially in western parts of Korea. Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province will remain in the bad range for ultrafine dust throughout the day today. And as westerly winds bring in additional dust from abroad, levels will rise even further. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 18 degrees Celsius. Daegu and Busan will top out at 20 degrees under sunny skies nationwide. Then another round of spring rain is expected nationwide from tomorrow night through Saturday afternoon.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.
Good evening and welcome to the 10 o'clock edition of Arirang News. Thanks for joining us on this special day, a day in which Arirang TV first goes on the air.
Arirang TV is Korea's first.
From all of us here at Arirang, thank you for watching. Your city next to 30 years.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea? If you signed a contract for a one room, obviously you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Thursday, April 2nd here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. And joining us for the first time today is Luan.
Good to be here.
Good to have you, and also Niles with us.
Good morning.
And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So we're heading to the final stretch of the work week, and with a wave of high-profile visits to Korea, most recently from the leaders of Indonesia and France, it's a fitting moment to look at Korea's growing global connections. And that's exactly why we're especially excited about today's guest, because joining us for the first time in the studio is Luan from France. So it's your first time on the show, and I can't think of a better episode to have join us. So before we start, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Okay.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you for receiving me. My name is Luan. I'm 24 years old and I'm from France. I am still a fourth year student at the University of Seoul, and I am so excited to be here.
Right, so Korea's diplomatic calendar has been active lately, especially with back-to-back visits from key global partners. So Niall, can you walk us through the Indonesian president's visit to Korea?
Right. So the Indonesian President Prabowo has been visiting South Korea since the 31st of last month, and he was welcomed with big gestures, grand ceremonies, military bands, and honor guards. And we also showed respect with halal cuisine by honoring the Muslim food guidelines, and lots of traditional gifts have been given. And President Lee Jae-myung held a summit with the president, and it's definitely a significant one as it follows after APEC 5 months later, and it served as an opportunity to discuss advancing strategic partnership between South Korea and Indonesia. Korea and Indonesia agreed to elevate ties to what they called a special comprehensive strategic partnership, and 무궁화 order was given to the president of Indonesia for his contribution for strengthening ties between the two nations.
And this week is especially meaningful given how rare a visit like this will be from France. So what makes a French president's visit particularly significant one?
It's been such a long time since the last French president came to visit Korea. After 11 years, the actual French president Emmanuel Macron will be here from today to tomorrow to talk with the Korean president Lee Jae-myung about AI, education, culture, nuclear, and a lot more.
Right, so this really shows how significant this visit is, not just because of the long gap, but also the wide range of issues that are on the table from AI to culture. So we're going to talk more about this, but first, let's take a look at the screen.
This week, Korea has been hosting a series of high-profile diplomatic visits. Indonesia's president is making a return just 5 months after the APEC summit, while France's president is visiting Korea for the first time in 11 years. With talks expected to span trade and investment, AI, and people-to-people exchanges, these visits highlight deepening cooperation on multiple fronts. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at how these ties extend beyond government, how ordinary citizens in both countries view Korea, and where these partnerships could be headed next.
Just as we saw in the video, these relationships go far beyond official talks. They're already part of everyday life. So let's first take a closer look at Indonesia's connection with Korea through travel, food, and culture. So what makes Indonesia so popular among Korean travelers, Niall?
Right. When you think of Indonesia, Koreans usually think of Bali first. It's a travel destination that Koreans love, especially the honeymooners. It's also popular for 1 month long stays. It's a beautiful place to be. And besides Bali, Gili Trawangan gained popularity over being introduced in various Korean variety shows. And Indonesia is also known for food, delicious food amongst Korean food lovers and travelers for dishes like nasi goreng and mie goreng. And the country is also rich in resources, natural resources, which is why many Korean businesses have expanded there for strategic purposes.
So it's quite fascinating how travel, food, and even TV shows help bring the two countries closer together. So now let's turn to France, which also holds a special place in the minds of many Koreans. So how do people around you usually describe France to you?
So usually Korean thinks directly of Paris, the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre Museum. They also think of different kinds of breads and food like baguettes, croissants, macarons, and even cheese. In addition, since there is Fashion Week, France seems also to be famous for fashion. Lastly, all of my Korean friends think that France has a beautiful landscape, and thanks to the series Emily in Paris, a lot more people tell me about that. For example, I am from a region next to Switzerland called Haute-Savoie, and my husband always says when he goes there that the landscape is amazingly beautiful.
I see. So it's interesting how each country has such a distinct and familiar image among Koreans. So this time, let's flip the perspective and see how Korea is viewed from abroad. So how is Korea perceived in Indonesia today?
Right. Obviously, the Hallyu Korean wave has reached there very strongly as well, and it's gone beyond this type of trend, but affecting even consumer behavior. In fact, one survey found that 57% of Indonesian consumers prefer Korean products over Western ones. And consumption of Korean content, of course, K-pop, K-dramas, and variety shows is very high. And along with this trend, things are popular in Korea Korea are also translating over to Indonesia. Like the latest trend in Korea was 두쫀쿠, to buy chewy cookie, and the popularity is strong there as well. Last year, Korea's tourism organization held a tourism event in Indonesia, and it attracted 120,000 people.
Wow, that's a huge number. And I guess that really shows how Korean culture has moved beyond trends and become part of everyday life there. And to gain a more personal perspective, we're going to be joined by a guest from Indonesia who lives in Korea. That conversation is coming up right after break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Rochelle, a college student from Indonesia who has lived in Korea for around 4 years. So hello, thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for featuring me in. I'm so honored.
So Rochelle, what perceptions of Korea do Indonesians have that either prove to be either true or wrong that you found out during your time in Korea?
Yeah, okay, so I cannot really be black or white according to this question because what I experienced might be different with others. But when I first came to Korea, I had zero expectations for the people. But I was aware that there is this perception that about Koreans, the locals, are pretty distant with foreigners, especially for the people who cannot speak Korean. But as time goes by, and this is my 4th year in Korea, I'm very thankful that I have a lot of good Korean friends that is very helpful. And they're actually very welcoming, and they are generally want to know about the country that I came from.
Okay, so which part of Korean culture is drawing the most interest in Indonesia?
To be honest, I think the very general answer to it is K-pop and K-drama, but I think it's just like a root level of it. In Indonesia, for everything that the trend is that is going on in Indonesia right now, of course, it is rooted by the Korean wave, but I think it goes to the deeper level where our lifestyle, what we eat, what we wear, is mostly affected by the Korean culture as well. In fact, in Indonesia, these days, the Korea's food trend is very big. And if I am on my social media, a lot of bakeries in Indonesia, they serve 두쫀쿠, or the recent one like pototok. So I think the Korea's trend that is going on, even like in Korea, it is fast spread in Indonesia as well.
Wow, that's amazing to hear from a local from Indonesia. But for you, when you talk to Koreans, what are some things that you wish Koreans knew about Indonesia?
As Indonesian, I do really wish that not only Korea, but the whole world knew that Indonesia is much more than Bali or Jakarta or nasi goreng. Yeah, but I do understand the idea how information about Indonesia is very limited because we are not as well exposed as Korea to the global world. But if you are really interested about Indonesia, I do recommend to start watch our movies or listening to our songs. In fact, a lot of artists in Indonesia, they have their songs in English, so the non-Indonesians can easily listen to it.
So you mentioned how you want more people to be more aware of different places in Indonesia. So before I let you go, I'm guilty because I also wanted to visit Bali. That's like one of my dream, honeymoon destinations, in the future. So what are some other places that people should explore in Indonesia?
Oh, I do recommend but if you prefer like beaches, you can go to Nusa Dua. There's this very like beautiful beach, and there are other places that can offer you a lot of culture as well, such as like Jakarta or Surabaya. And yeah.
Great. Okay, we'll keep that in mind. And thank you so much for coming on today, Rochelle.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So we just heard from a young person from Indonesia what people there get right or wrong about Korea, which parts of Hallyu they're most into, and what in Indonesia she wishes young Koreans knew more about. Now let's shift our focus from Southeast Asia to Europe and see how the picture compares. So how is Korea perceived in France, and what part of Korean culture is currently trending now?
Of course, we can't not talk about the Korean wave there as well. It's significant. Last year, Stray Kids drew a crowd of 120,000 at Stade de France, and the country's largest stadium, actually. And Jennie held a solo concert at Le Zénith in Paris. And Korean dramas are performing very well. Squid Game 3, When Life Gives You Tangerines. They stayed at the Netflix's top 10 for quite a long time. And although France is a powerhouse in cosmetics, interest in K-beauty has also been rising, leading to increased consumption of Korean beauty products. And another interesting point is that France highly values artistic merit of comics, and that's helped the webtoon industry expand widely into France. And in fact, Korean companies account for about 70 to 80% of French webtoon platform market.
I think all of this really shows how deeply Hallyu and Korean culture has taken root in France, not just in entertainment apparently, but across beauty and even the digital content space like webtoons. So is there any other areas that people are interested in?
Korea is also seen as a really safe and modern country. I know that a lot of French also love the fact that Korean culture is a mix of traditionality and modernity. Korean culture that is trending all around France, like Nal said, is of course their skincare. Everyone knows about that and adopt this routine. We even use a Korean brand that is only known in Europe. In addition, these days Korean movies and animation are more and more famous in the Hexagon with, for example, the recent animation movie K-pop Demon Hunters. Everyone is touched by the Hallyu, kids, adolescents, and adults.
I mean, it's so amazing that a culture that's so famous for its culture, like France is obviously known for its food and its content, that they appreciate Korean stuff. It's really interesting. So also, but then now that you've experienced Korea firsthand, it makes it more interesting on a personal level as well. So what type of stereotypes do people in France have about Korea and vice versa now?
I think for Koreans, it's actually pretty good stereotypes in some ways, because when we think of France, it's out of admiration. It's the fashion, the luxury, the beauty, and of course you mentioned landscapes earlier and the vibes, right? But I don't think Koreans really had deep knowledge of the French people themselves to have personality stereotypes about them quite yet, unlike, more familiar nationalities like Americans and French and the British. And so I think it's to come. But in terms of how the French view Koreans, well, I haven't been to France in a while, maybe over 10 years, and last time it was when Korea was not as popular and Hallyu wave was not as big, and so I was just probably considered what they call Asiatique, which means Asian, or sometimes mistaken for Chinoise, which means Chinese, right? And that was that. But it's so interesting to see the transformation of Korean Hallyu wave making differences in different culture, even for Koreans.
Right, so you lived in Korea for around 6 years, right? And you also go to college in Korea, so I know you're probably the best person to ask. So what do you need to add to this?
So now when I ask my Korean friends about it, they have can have stereotype. They know a bit more about France, and they answer that France has the image of a country that has strong human rights values and that we fight a lot to protect them through demonstration. They also think that most French are fine connoisseurs or appreciate wine, even though I personally don't like it. The interesting part is when I asked my French surroundings about what they think of Koreans, a similar answer about human rights value being well protected came up due to the incident last year. In addition, French people have this image of Koreans handling pretty well spicy food and being more open about cosmetic surgery.
Interesting. So it's always fun to see how those perceptions play out in real life, sometimes spot on, sometimes way off. And taking a step back, these culture exchanges also tie into the bigger global picture. So this is kind of a big question, but how should countries cooperate in today's complex global environment?
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge question for sure, but diplomacy really is not a type of fantasy, and each country has its gain and loss in the relationship, and sometimes it's a bit of a tug of war. But for many where the exchanges are quite pleasant and positive, it's considered a very cordial relationship. And in the case of France and Indonesia, as we've been seeing, it seems to be very pleasant for the most part. And I hope this soft power, really plays into the economic and even political effects in the future.
Right, so in light of the French president's visit to Korea, and you're also a French person living in Korea, what are your thoughts on this?
So, you know, when we say in a relationship that communication is the key, I think that the same thing should be applied to diplomatic relationships. I hope they will communicate peacefully and clearly about what they should do to keep good global relationships and extend their soft power. They should not be selfish and be open to any suggestions or opinions that another nation could make to ameliorate any possible exchange.
Well said, well said. So as we've seen today, those connections go far beyond diplomacy, shaped by culture, people, and everyday experiences. From Indonesia to France, Korea's global ties continue to deepen in ways that feel both meaningful and personal. And in an increasingly complex world, it's these shared interests and mutual understanding that will help guide stronger partnerships ahead. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Luan.
Thank you for having me.
Coming in, also Nayo.
That was so fun.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you're feeling a bit more globally connected after today's discussion. We are
News Generation.
Hello, Arirang. I am Kojo Choi, Ghana's ambassador to Korea. Happy 30th anniversary. All eyes are on you, all ears are on you. Fighting!
Curious about Korea?
And especially K-food? How familiar are you with Korean food? The sea on 3 sides, a mountainous terrain, and 4 distinct seasons. Thanks to these conditions, Korean cuisine bursts with diverse and unique flavors.
Do you prefer sweet or spicy?
A meat lover or a seafood connoisseur?
Can't decide?
There's got to be something here that you like.
For Koreans, rice is foundational. It's a staple and the centerpiece to all meals in Korea. There's bibimbap, rice mixed with vegetables, gukbap, rice in hot soup, and kimbap is the demand around the world.
For me, it's noodles over rice. Korea has amazing noodle dishes. Chuy ramen and cold naengmyeon to blow away the heat. A meat lover here, pork, beef, chicken, I like them all. Did you know that bulgogi is listed in the English dictionary? There's also the famous chimek, chicken and beer, which is the best combo for a night out with friends.
Surrounded by the sea on 3 sides, Korea has a great selection of seafood, from raw fish to piping hot seafood soups. It's mouth-watering just talking about it. The 2 pillars of Korean condiments, gochujang and soy sauce.
Ooh, what do you prefer?
Gochujang. I like anything made with gochujang. In general,